Welcome back. In this video we're gonna advance your modeling skills by practicing the techniques that you've already learned in the previous videos. We are gonna focus now on the ground floor window area that has a couple of interesting challenges. Amongst others, we're gonna focus on the technique of snapping for accurate placement of elements and to create gapless connections between architectural elements. In addition, I'm going to show you how to create even spaces between architectural elements that are repeating and how to adapt already modeled elements for reuse elsewhere in the model. And last, we're going to model architectural elements that are not on a 90-degree angle. So let's get started. So this ground floor window area is a bit more complicated than modeling the upper floors or the roof. It has a lot of different architectural features, and one of the challenges is again the question of what elements should I include in one object and what elements should I separate from each other. So this is in part determined by actual architectural elements that make sense to separate, but also in part by what is convenient in terms of modeling. I'm assuming you have followed the previous videos and have already modeled something like this. Even if you haven't, you can still follow along. We're gonna hide the upper floors and the roof so they're not in the way. Also, the ground floor is something that you can hide. We're gonna turn on the source material again, and we're going to take a look at this lower area and see how it was actually built. So looking at this architectural feature, I see several sort of columns. There's a lower wall, there are a couple of doors, a lintel that continues all around the building. That's something that we're going to model in another video. So in this case, I believe it would be smart to create different objects for these columns that we see here and also this lower wall. So this lower wall, basically when we look at the photograph, that's a stone part, and actually also the lower part of these columns are stone and the upper part of these columns are wood-based construction. But for modeling's sake, we're going to include this. So basically we have a exterior frame in which the larger windows and doorway are placed, and the larger windows and the smaller windows also have their own frames. So the exterior frame made up by the columns and the lower walls would be one model or one object in my model, and the different windows would be as well. Now we can see that in the historical source material that we have, there's already a difference between this photograph and the architectural drawing. So apparently this design was never executed exactly as was drawn. They deviated from this on various details. So one important one is this upper row of windows that is not in the original architectural drawing. So that is something that we have to add based on the photograph. And then there is another interesting architectural feature that we will model as a separate object, and that's this windowsill here that is basically placed on an angle to connect between the window frame and the low wall. To start, we're gonna model these columns and this lower wall on this side of the building, and then we're gonna duplicate that and adapt it for use on this side of the building. So we're gonna start with a front orthographic view. I'm placing the 3D cursor over here with Shift and right click, and then I hit Shift A for adding a new object, a mesh object. So I'm starting with a cube as usual. I turn off X-ray so I can see through, and then with Tab I'm going into edit mode. Make sure that I have face selection mode on so I can start modifying this. I'm selecting this face of the cube And what I'm trying to do, I'm basically trying to model this backside of this vertical architectural element. The front thing with the column and the details, we're not going to model in this video. We're going to focus on the general structure. So I'm selecting this face and I'm going all the way up until here. This will be the limit of our model because the upper lintel with its profile is the subject of another video. We're going to model this here. Then I'm going to create from this column, I'm going to extrude in this direction to create this lower wall. So to do this, I'm going to use the loop cut tool. I click, hold the mouse button and drag until about here, because this is the limit of that wall. Above that will be the slanted window sill. I will go to select and make sure that I have face selection on again. Go into front orthographic view. Don't worry about the front and the back side. We're going to modify that later. And I'm going to extrude this area until here. I'm going to extrude another one until here. So this will be a more like a narrow column or part of the frame between the door and the window. We'll now extrude this one upwards again. And now we have to make sure that this matches the top of this side. So we turn on snapping. And because I've already extruded, I now have to switch to the move tool in order to move this face to the level of this face. So I'm starting to move. I hover above this edge over here and it's now exactly the same height. So next is this column. So I'm deciding that this should be part of this object. I could also model this as a separate object, but I'm now still in edit mode. And I hit Shift A for a cube. Make sure that face selection is on, and then I'm dragging this. Okay, so I turn off snapping because it's interfering with my movement. I place it here, and this one I place over here. Now I turn on snapping again to make sure it's on the same level as these. And also the bottom one is on the same level as these. So now I have to modify the front and back end. For that, I'm first selecting them all by hitting A on the keyboard. And I'm going to use scaling to scale the depth of these architectural elements. But first I'm going to go into top orthographic view because that allows me to look at the plan of this building to see the dimensions of the depth of these frames. So I hit S and then I only want to scale on the Y axis. So S for scale, Y. Alternatively, you can use the tool over here and then you can use that one. So I'm scaling, then I'm moving and scaling. Moving. Also, I have to make sure that, so I'm now selecting this. Make sure that this is aligning well, and this one will be like this. Okay, so back to front orthographic view. So now we have modeled everything that is part of the main structure basically of this window frame. So we're going out of editing mode by switching here to object mode again, or hit tab on the keyboard, and we're going to model the window frame now. So we're gonna shift and right click and add a cube. Go into edit mode by hitting tab and first modify this. Okay, so actually this window frame part should align with the top side of the sill. It's not entirely clear sometimes what exactly the width is of this window frame. So then we're moving this up to here. To create the horizontal parts of this frame, we're going to use the loop cut tool again. So in this case, here's the loop cut tool. We're going to click and drag. And this element with these gaps, maybe they're ventilation gaps, I'm not entirely sure, maybe they're decorative, but they're clearly not in the real building. So we're just eyeballing this so it has roughly the same dimensions as the vertical frame part. And we're going to do this as well for the top side. Back to selection. The next thing that we need to do is model a post for the other side. Of course, we're not going to model this from scratch because we have just modeled it. So we're going to select everything with a drag select and then mesh duplicate to duplicate this. And you can see here it has Shift D as a keyboard shortcut, so I'm going to use that. It's a little bit easier. Shift D. And then I want to move this to the other side, but on the X axis. So I hit X on the keyboard once, and then I'm moving this. And I have to make sure that snapping is still on, and then it snaps exactly to the side of the outer frame. Now we need to make the connections between the top and the bottom side of the window frame. So I'm going to select this one and then shift, select that one, right mouse button, bridge faces, select this one and this one. Okay, now I didn't see with the transparency on, it can be sometimes a bit tricky to select the face. Shift, but you should look at the little dots that are in the center of these faces to click on those to make sure you select the right one. Right mouse button, bridge faces. Alright, so now we have to make sure that the frame has the right depth. So select everything, A to select everything. And now I'm going to scale this frame on the Y axis. So I hit S on the keyboard, and you're of course free to use the scale tool as well. S on the keyboard, and I'm scaling only on the Y axis. So something like that. And to get exactly right dimensions, I have to go into the top orthographic perspective. So first I'm going to move it, and now snapping is on, so I turn it off. And as you can see, I already have it scaled in the right way. So now we have the inner frame of this window. The next step is to create frames for the additional windows at the top. As you can see, these are not represented in the architectural drawing, so we have to model them from the photo. One reference that we have is that the lower part of those windows is a little bit higher than the top part of the doors. We can use these as a reference and try to put the lower bar of the window frame over here. As you can see, this window has one large lintel on top, which is part of the bigger window, and on top of that are the three smaller windows, which have two posts which stick out a little bit more, and inside there are frames with little window panes. So first we're going to model this one. And for convenience sake, we're gonna model them as part of the main window frame. So we're gonna use the loop cut tool to do that. So, and we're gonna look at it from front orthographic perspective. And then I'm moving this one up here, and then also one on this side. And you can see snapping doesn't work, so I turn on snapping, turn on the move tool. Now make sure that these are aligned. I get the loop cut tool again, click and drag. Yeah, I have to sort of estimate this, click and drag. Now the edge snapping tool is on. Okay, so now we have this one. Maybe I can make it a little bit thicker, this bar. So this loop cut is selected, but this one hasn't been selected yet. So Alt and then click. Yeah, and we also have to select, so we do Shift Alt and reselect this one. So we now have them both selected, and we drag them down a little bit. I'm trying to use this as a reference to make them the same height. Okay, face select mode on, and then I will use the bridge faces function again to create this crossbar. Alright, so now it's time to create the smaller window panes here at the top. So we're gonna turn off the sources. We don't need them anyway because they don't show us these windows over here. Going to edit mode, then I'm going to select loop cut tool. I'm going to turn off snapping. Sometimes it interferes a little bit with loop cuts, just to be sure, turn it off. And then I click once in the middle of this horizontal element, and I increase the number of cuts to 2. So we do the same over here. So to create these vertical elements, I'm going to use another tool of Blender, and that's the bevel tool. So we select these edges and then select the bevel tool, use the handle, and then start dragging. And as you can see, it now creates sort of narrow faces over here. I should not try to do them again if I have already dragged once and stopped dragging. No, if I want to redo it, I do Ctrl Z. And if I want to modify it, use this pop-up window over here. I hold Shift now to make very small increments to be a bit more precise. Turning off the bevel tool, face selection mode on, and I will select the opposing faces and then bridge these faces. So bridge faces, and over here bridge faces. Now it seems like we have now created equal divisions, and that is partially correct. If we would want to measure this, we can measure this to double check it. So I put a measuring line here, I put one here, and I will put one here. And these distances between the lines are exactly the same everywhere. However, if we start to measure these distances, they don't correspond. So the middle one is a little bit less wide than the outer ones, and that is because these rods also take up some space. To modify this, we can select, turn on this one, select this area, and then over here, I'm scrolling a little bit to find it, I will show the edge length. So now shows me the edge length of all selected edges, but as soon as I'm going to scale on the x-axis, I hit S and then X, you can see these length increase and the one on the other side decrease. So we will move this up 6, 6. I hit Shift to move it small increments, 6, 5, 6, 4. So now this edge is 0.674 meters, and this one is also 67.4 centimeters. So this is not completely accurate, but good enough for our purposes. So we will turn off edge length visualization so it doesn't interfere with our modeling anymore. So the next thing that we need to model are these smaller window frames. I will make sure that the 3D cursor is on the right location by shift clicking. I hit Shift A or go add mesh cube, and I will go into edit mode by hitting tab and scale a little bit. And then I want to move it to make sure that it aligns with this square. So I'm moving it like this. snapping on. Alright, this is important. If your element that you want to align with these edges is on the outside of these edges, and I'm trying to align this, you can see that it will try to snap to the closest edges it has. So when I want to snap this side, this corner, or these edges to these edges, I first have to move it to the inside to make sure that these edges are the closest to these edges. So now I can move it to the side and also move it here, and it is snapped to the outer frame. Now we'll make sure that I have face selection mode on and select those and move it. Okay, next we're going to create this frame basically by selecting the front or the back and the front faces and use the inset tool. The inset tool was discussed also in a previous video on modeling the windows. So the front and back are selected, and I will start to drag this, and I will turn off X-ray so I can better see. Just like the bevel tool, don't try to inset it again and again in order to modify it until you're satisfied with the width of the frame. If you have already applied it, just do Ctrl Z to undo it, and then do it once and use this to modify it after you used the tool once. You're basically eyeballing it based on what you see here. So now we are going to create this gap. We've used the bridge faces tool before, and then using the scale tool here, scale it on the y-axis like so. Something like that, and then move it into position. Last, we need to model these vertical and horizontal rods that keep the small glass panes in the window frame. And we're gonna do that the same way as we model these. Pick the loop cut tool, turn off snapping, select one, click once, and double the number of cuts. Then turn back to the select tool, select each of these edges, and then pick the bevel tool to make equal sized faces. Then we have to make sure that face selection mode is on again, and then select these opposing ones, bridge faces, bridge faces, bridge faces, bridge faces. So that's our small window frame. As you can see, the geometry is crossing here, and it creates this sort of ugly rendering. If you really want to do this properly, you would need to create individual connections between these horizontal and vertical rods. But for now, this is good enough. Just remaining is to duplicate this one 2 times to fill these frames as well. So we select all, and then we use the shortcut Shift D, and then move it on the X-axis by hitting X on the keyboard. Okay, snapping is not on, so we turn on snapping. And then we use Shift D again, and to remind you, it's also available here, Mesh Duplicate. Shift D is simply much faster, Shift D, X. Okay, next, the door and the window above the door. For that, we're gonna turn on the sources again, turn on X-ray, select the main frame, and then make sure to select the loop cut tool, front orthographic view. Then we sort of have to estimate where the upper lintel above the door is. It's a bit hard based on this drawing. Face select opposing faces and bridge them. First we're gonna do the upper window. Same techniques that we've used to create these windows. We are going to assume that it also has this division of 3 by 3. So place a 3D cursor, create a cube. Edit mode. And to model a little bit faster, I'm using now the keyboard shortcut for movement. So I'm not picking the move tool. I'm actually using G on the keyboard, and then you can see it starts moving, and then X to move it on the desired axis. G, Z over here. Select the front. And now I'm also using this keyboard shortcut for insetting. Go in front to make it a little bit similar to that one, and then select bridge faces. I will use the keyboard shortcut for loop cut tools, but you can use this one as well. Create one here. Control R is the shortcut for that. Control R, and I'm using the scroll wheel to increase the number of cuts. Control R. Then I will select all of these edges. And I do Control B, which is the shortcut for beveling. And then we'll go back to face select mode, bridge, 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 bridge. Select all, and then I hit S, Y to scale on the Y axis, turning off the source material, and I'm trying to move it to exactly G, Y to snap it over here. So now I'm selecting by dragging over these faces. I'm selecting all of these front faces. I'm trying to align them with this one over here. So that's the upper window above the doorway. And then apparently this doorway has a lot of smaller window panes as well. Oh, okay, I see. This is actually representing this grill. We don't go into the effort of modeling this entire grill in this example, but I will create another cube, Shift A, go into edit mode. This one aligned over here. This one aligned over here. This one aligns over here. This one goes a little bit above, so we have space for a threshold. So we select all, scale Y, thickness of the door, so approximately, but you can see it here also on the plan drawing. Turning off snapping. We can create these sort of 3 panels of the door. We will create a loop cut, Control R, another loop cut over here. And then I will use the inset tool on both of these. And then I will use individual insetting, turning off the sources. And use another inset. Actually, I think the outer one is too big, so inset something like that, and then another one like that. And then we will select this one and move this out a little bit. And we can actually do the same with this one, but we will create a window here. hitting I for the inset tool, and then bridge faces. Okay, we'll quickly also create the threshold, edit mode, not make it stick out a little bit, and align the back with the back of the wall. Okay, then there's one remaining element for this side of the facade, and that is, you can hardly see it here, but there's the windowsill. It's on an angle, so the way that we modeled it, it's quite a steep angle that we should create a sill that reaches from this edge to this edge. To do that, we first create a model for the windowsill again by adding a cube. We make it as wide as the window frame, and the bottom, this is just an estimate, and we will have to turn off snapping. Now, and if you want to know how thick it actually is, you just turn edge length, and then if you start moving, you see that, oh, okay, so it's 3 centimeters, 3.8 centimeters, something like that. 3.5, yeah, that seems about right. We don't have any data on this, so it's just an estimate. Move the back side, turn on snapping again, and then turn it over here. Okay. Alright, so the challenge here is to rotate it and make sure that it covers exactly the area from this until that edge. I could rotate it in edit mode, but we're not going to do that. We're not gonna use the rotate tool like so. I'm going to show you in a bit why that is. We're going to go out of edit mode in object mode and then use the rotate tool. Only the problem is when I'm using the rotate tool, you can see in this case it is using the origin of this object, this dot over here. I'm moving the 3D cursor away. This dot is the origin of this object, and it sort of inherited that from the cube that we created. This was originally the center of the cube. So it uses that as a rotation point, and actually that's not something that we want. We have aligned this edge exactly with the edge of the frame, so we want to rotate it around that edge actually. So how do we make sure it does that? Well, we can make sure that the 3D cursor actually snaps to that edge, and then use the 3D cursor to rotate this windowsill. In order to do that, I have to go into editing mode again, edge select mode, select this edge only, and go to mesh, snap, cursor to selected. So as you can see, the cursor, the 3D cursor is now selected exactly to this edge. So we can now go out of editing mode, and we choose, instead of the median point of the object, which is basically the origin of the object, we choose the 3D cursor as the transform pivot point, so the point from which your transformations occur, in this case rotation. And now when I start rotating, you can see it keeps my alignment with the window frame. Okay, so now I have to go into side view, and I am sort of eyeballing this like so. And now I will show you the reason why we decided to do this rotation in object mode instead of editing mode. Because now we're going into edit mode, select the move tool, when I have this face selected, and probably your transformation orientation is still on global, and I'll also make sure that this is back to median point, so it will use the face that we selected as the origin for the transformation. Instead of global, I can select local, so that means that it's using the local axis orientation of this object. If I had rotated this in object mode, and I can quickly show you what would happen if I did that. So I make a duplicate of this one and reset the rotation to 0. Go into edit mode, A, and then rotate like so. And now when I try to move this face in local view, it can only move in that and that direction. And this creates non-90-degree angles and introduces deformation in the object. So because we did the rotation in object mode instead of edit mode, the local axis orientation of this object remains intact. So now when I select local and select this face, I can actually move it straight or perpendicular to its faces. Turn on. Yes, okay. So that's it. We finished modeling this part of the building. We could of course still add the window glass, but for now we settle for this, and you could easily do this yourself.